Guys, I'm blown away that after literally years of neglect, the 3 is back. For such an inexpensive car, this thing rips. What's going on, everyone? In today's episode, I'm gonna be doing the last of the mechanical repairs Project Mazda 3 needs to be roadworthy, including new motor mounts and a new strut. So let's jump into it. We were starting with the strut replacement first. So with the car safely on jack stands, break your lug nuts loose and remove the wheel. Like many cheap Japanese Econo boxes, the Mazda 3 uses a McPherson strut front suspension, which is relatively simple to service. Undo the sway bar end link, loosen the clamp bolt that mounts the strut to the steering knuckle, and then remove the 3 bolts that mount the strut to the chassis, and then it should be able to come loose. Some pry bar and or force may be necessary. With the strut assembly out of the car, this is the part that tends to scare people most of the time, that is using spring compressors. By compressing the spring, we can relieve tension on the spring and the strut mount and disassemble the whole thing without it blowing apart into pieces. It is certainly scary the first few times you do this, but after a while it becomes second nature, and it is actually very, very simple, and the tool is very intuitive to use. You can rent these at your local auto parts store. Now obviously assembly is the reverse of removal. All you have to do is line the spring up into the strut. There's usually a bump stop or a little end that the spring lines up in, and then you kind of just assemble all the pieces and clamp the strut mount back down onto the spring, and then you're good to go. It's worth noting that ahead of this video, I did try and remove the sway bar end links, assuming that they might be the cause of some of our suspension noises, but no, the sway bar end links were totally fine. And so in that case, it either has to be, the strut itself or the strut mount. Unfortunately, now that I have this side put back together, I was able to test this strut, and it is really sticky when you push it down under compression, but it does have rebound. So the noise might actually be coming from the shock top. I'm hoping it was just the strut, because I obviously just replaced the strut and not the strut top. But I guess we'll see when we put the car back on the ground. Next thing on the agenda, assuming that is fixed, is the remaining 2 motor mounts on this car. Now, in the previous episode, I sneaked in at the very end, me replacing the rear motor mount. I did it in like 8 or 9 minutes real time, very easy. There are 2 other main motor mounts, one on each frame rail of this car. The passenger mount is really easy, and the trans mount is much more complicated to get to. But after replacing the rear mount, I got rid of a lot of the vibrations issues the car had when you pull the clutch out or at idle. But there's still a little bit of vibrations there, so I'm gonna go ahead and replace the other 2 main motor mounts on this car. Now fortunately, this one is really easy, so let's do this one first. The passenger side engine mount is pretty simple on these cars. All you need to do is remove the washer fluid reservoir, which is just held in by 2 big clips, and then you can access the 2 bolts and 2 studs that hold the motor mount onto the frame rail and onto the side of the engine. Use your 19mm socket and break those guys loose. Once they are loose, put a jack under the bottom of the engine to lightly support it, and then kind of just jiggle the mount free. And obviously, replacement is the reverse of removal. Oh, and take a look at the passenger side mount I just pulled out of this car. It's not supposed to be 2 pieces. That might explain a lot of things. With the passenger side engine mount replaced, I'm also going to do the driver side engine mount. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stuff in the way. The engine mount is actually like down here, so all this stuff has to come out, which is going to make for a really fun day. Just finding the transmission mount takes some work in a Mazda 3 because you have to remove the battery, remove the ECU from the battery box, then remove the entire battery box assembly. Then after that, remove the air intake system. With that out of the way, you'll be able to see the bracket that mounts between the engine and the transmission mount and the transmission itself. With everything out of the way, replacing the engine mount is still not a piece of cake. You have to actually get the mount itself out of the bracket that locates the engine mount, the engine, and the transmission all together on the driver's side frame rail. With the jack under the engine, remove each bolt one at a time, keeping an eye on the engine so it doesn't move too far forward, because it is entirely possible it will get stuck under the radiator core support, which makes the whole job much harder. Now normally reassembly is the opposite of removal, like I've been saying, but in the case of this aftermarket transmission mount, the job got much harder due to poor fitment, as you'll see here. What I ended up doing is wrapping my entire forearm on the top of the engine and pulling it back, and that allowed me to get the bolt holes close enough I could mount them in one at a time and get the transmission mount located properly. Oh man, what a pain in the ass. Okay, so these 2 engine mounts, passenger side and driver side, I bought are OE, but not OEM. I bought them off Amazon. And this is what you get sometimes with aftermarket OE type stuff. the fitment was not perfect. So the bolt hole for the main bolt that holds the motor mount to the side of the transmission and then to the frame rail was off by like 2 millimeters, I swear. The bolt hole is supposed to be like dead center in the bushing, but in this aftermarket one, it's just like slightly offset. Like they just drilled it in the wrong spot when they put it on their like assembly jig or whatever in China. So that made all this very complicated. So I ended up kind of wallering out the mounting holes on this trans mount where it bolts onto the frame rail. That would kind of get enough slack to kind of pull the engine by the throttle actuator here back to line it all up and kind of get it to go in. Wow, that was a lot of work. Check it out, the Mazda 3 is all fixed. I'm blown away. It turns out that all the transmission issues this car has had, you know, over the years, killing axles, making weird noises, was because all of the motor mounts in this car were broken. Apparently they were all original. Now, the rear motor mount wasn't that bad. I replaced it before, though that did solve a lot of the vibration issues, though the noise was still there. The vibrations were quelled a lot, but the noise was still there. At low speeds, when the transmission was cold, it'd be really noisy, even though it shifted fine. But after doing both the driver and passenger side motor mounts, all the noise is gone. This thing drives great. And fortunately, despite my sneaking suspicions earlier, replacing that passenger front strut has got rid of all the clunking and knocking noises coming from the passenger front suspension. This car feels factory fresh now. It's really nice. Because remember, back in the day, back in 2008, this was kind of the car to have in the compact car segment. You know, compared to a contemporary Corolla or a Honda Civic, this was the fun choice. The 2.3 liter engine revs out nicely. You know, downshifting with the 5-speed manual is a piece of cake. This is a nice driving little car, and it still is now, even after, what, 12 years and 170,000 miles? This thing feels great. It's really eager, really light on its toes. And I remember from the years of owning my Mazda 3 hatchback way back in the day, you know, that light flickable steering is still here. The light clutch is so easy. The shifter is so nice. This is a really nice driving little car, and all the fixes I've done to this thing have restored that. It feels really good. For such an inexpensive car, this thing rips. The little 2.3 engine is just like my car from years ago. It's eager, and it likes to rev, but it has this nice fat mid-range. I mean, I think these things make peak torque at like 4,000, but they like have a nice plateau. Once you're over 2,500, you're really in the power band with this engine. And similarly, I know I touched on it before, but after fixing this thing, the transmission's even better. It got more crisp, which isn't surprising, you know, broken motor mounts versus new ones, but just, it feels so nice. This is a nice little car. Sorry, I can't even speak. And despite, you know, being on plain Jane commuter grade tires, you can hustle this thing faster than people have to pull over and let you pass by, which is pretty funny. And man, it's truly nostalgic driving this thing because it brings back all those memories of my old Mazda 3. It was the first car I ever modified. It was the first car I went autocrossing in, the first car I went to the track in. You know, it cemented so many ideas into me and became such a part of my identity. You know, it turned me into a guy who modified cars, a guy who wanted to go to the track, a guy who wanted to go to these winding roads and have fun. And so to take this car from being neglected and worthless and turning it into something and back into a nice car, it's just really satisfying. Guys, how can I wrap this up other than to say I'm blown away? I knew these cars were tough from back when I owned one and I beat the crap out of them mercilessly. I knew these things were tough, but I figured this car was so far gone, there's only so much we could do to bring it back. But it's great. I'm blown away by how nice this car is to drive. And so if you are at all interested in this car after all the work I've done to cleaning this thing up, please hit me in the DM, drop a comment down below. Obviously, I'm located in LA. You probably have to be in LA to buy this thing. No one's gonna fly across the country to buy a Mazda 3 at the end of the day, but this is just a nice little car. It's so fun. And after all the work I've done, it's super reliable now too. There should pretty much be belts and oil changes and maybe some tires at some point. And that's it for the rest of this car's life. these engines will go for hundreds of thousands of miles, and at 170, it feels factory fresh. So, someone please buy this thing so I can get more room in my driveway. I'm just gonna be sad to see it go. Am I rambling? I'm rambling. Sorry, feeling really nostalgic here. Anyways, thank you very much for watching. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for subscribing. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.